The Joe Rogan Experience.
I found out about your restaurant online. I was just Googling new places to go for dinner. And I don't know, it was like maybe a couple years ago. And I was Googling steakhouses, and then I saw that you specialize in dry-aged steaks. And I had a steak that you cooked once that was more than a year. Dry-aged was just so... It was delicious, but it was really weird. I mean,
it's weird.
It doesn't taste
different.
Anything like a regular steak. It tastes like, it's like a different animal.
Yeah.
It's like you're eating something, some exotic animal.
And that's what I like to do. I mean, more age doesn't necessarily mean better, but, it's just different. And that's, for me as a chef, I call my dry age room an environmental chamber.
I think there's a picture on Instagram of me and Adam in the basement, that fucking
meat locker,
weird meat room that you've got. And it's for people that have never been to a dry aging room, it's very odd. There's fans blowing around. Everything's a very specific temperature. You got all these different things labeled as far as like what date it was put in there. And for people who haven't seen dry aging, it's very odd too, because you're like, hey, what is wrong with that meat?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the outside crust of it. You got here's a photo of it, folks. You can see it in the background of the. It's not working. We got a technical. There it is. So, for folks, you can see it in the background. The meat has like a black crust to it. And then you slice that crust off. What do you do with the crust?
Get rid of it.
But is it edible?
It's not enjoyable.
What about for dogs?
I want to give something a dog I want to eat myself.
Wow.
So,
You would eat dog food?
What's that?
Do you eat dog food?
No.
But you feed your dog food?
I don't have a dog. I wish I did, to be honest with you.
I have a dog, and he eats dog food.
Yeah.
I love him to death. But he actually eats ground elk.
But
mixed in with regular dog food.
Even that, I mean, it gets a white ash, which is almost like I call it there's a friendly oxidation, I referred to it in the whole process, okay?
Is that white ash like the same as you get on outside of salami?
It's like that. It's part of it. It's a mold. And the whole concept behind dry aging, it's based on three things. It's air velocity, temperature, and humidity.
Air velocity?
Yes. And it's really important. I like to... when I teach people about dry aging, it's like if you were on a beach in Jamaica and there was no wind and you just start getting sweat and you're just uncomfortable. But then if trade winds went through, it would have, at the same temperature, it would evaporate the water off your skin. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to, at the right ratio, evaporate the water off the surface so it doesn't get like a smelly, stinky, bad mold. And dehydrate it slowly. What it does is it concentrates the flavor. It transforms the amino acids into a whole different compound and changes the flavor altogether. And then also enzymes within the meat through the process of rigor mortis. It breaks down so it becomes more tender. So you get flavor enhancement, you get tenderization, and it just blows it away.
So what does it do to the amino acids?
It transforms it into a whole nother compound. It's like a flavor. It's like when we talk, have you ever heard of like concept of like Maillard reaction?
Yes, but I don't know what it means anymore. I've heard the expression, but I forgot what it means.
Yeah, the Maillard reaction is basically like when you're cooking something, what ends up happening.
Spell it?
God, I'm the worst speller.
Is it Maillard?
No, Maillard.
Right,
Okay.
Maillard. Okay,
Maillard. Okay, I said Maillard. Okay, that's what I know as. So, whenever you're browning or you're doing different things at different rates, amino acids transform into different things, and you get different flavor compounds, and that's really what happens, with meat. So if I dry age, you have to handle dry age meat a lot differently. You can't go out and say, okay, I'm going to slow cook this once it's dry age, because then it develops a really nasty kind of like funky flavor. But if you cook it under high heat, like really aggressive, like that's why you have steakhouse broilers, there's something about that browning of that dry aged meat that transforms it, just like awakens your senses.
That's interesting. So you don't slow cook dry aged meat?
No, I don't. It gets livery. It's almost like a livery. So if
really?
Yeah, I don't even, if anybody wants dry age above medium, I try to talk them out. I'll cook it any way you want. But if you start cooking it past medium, it's almost like, seeing someone like transform, like it just ages. Like when you cook it a long time, it just ages and just turns into something else. It's
Those
just
people
nasty.
who want well done steak are offensive. You should go and eat Burger King, you monsters. What's wrong with you? When I go to dinner with someone, they order well done steak, I just cringe. I'm like, who am I eating?
Yeah, it's a cultural thing I noticed with some people. Like they just want to cook. But if they want a well done steak, then I recommend a wet aged steak to do well done because, at least, you have a fighting chance for some type of flavor that would be appealing.
But it's weird. Like, why are you eating steak?
Yep. It's true. It's true.
It's just
that's for me,
for everybody.
Yeah.
It's a criminal. It's a criminal act. You're wasting a piece of meat.
It's true. I kind of look the other way. I mean,
what do you want? Ketchup with that?
Yeah, it's painful for me.
Yeah,
it's painful.
I mean, some people grew up eating well done steak, and that's how they like it. Joey Diaz eats medium well. Medium well. I'm like, what are you doing? Why? It just doesn't taste as good.
Mm-mm.
And it's also, there's an art to the perfect temperature, right? What's the perfect internal temperature of a medium rare steak? Like, what should it be, like 135 or something?
No, it's a bit less, but it's not necessarily the temperature. It's kind of like how you get there. Okay, let me explain that to you. So I have this method where, particularly for thicker steaks, where I'll cook it, I start the cooking, and then I get it to about 105 degrees, and then I allow it to rest at 105. And what ends up happening is I call the method just like tempering of the meat, and it basically, it starts transmitting the temperature in towards the center, and then I put it back in again, and then it'll heat up. The temperature, if you take it, I would say for medium rare, even though on many logs we'll say, okay, 120, 125 is rare, but it's not. For me, if you're going to do that method, a solid medium rare will be about 120.
Really?
Yeah.
So why do they think 120 is rare?
I don't really understand it exactly. They'll get there. I think they're overshooting it particularly. For me, it's not rare. Rare is 110 using the method that I use.
Now, different people have different methods, which is really what's fascinating about cooking meat. I ate at a couple times. I've eaten at Bazaar Meats in Vegas, which is a fantastic restaurant.
Yes, fantastic.
Amazing
chef, Jose Andres. Amazing.
It's an amazing place, too. When you walk in there, it's just visually, it's really interesting because they have these grills with live logs. I mean, they take, not live, obviously, but they take logs. They're cooking all over fire, and they have these grates, these grill grates that rise and lower, and you could see how they're doing it when you walk in the door. Like as you're walking to your table, you're passing by, and this idea of cooking over logs, like cooking over fire. Some people prefer that. And then some people like those crazy broilers where they're gas, but the broiler, it's on top and you slide the steak in and it's lowering down.
Exactly.
What is there a difference and why?
It really comes down to what your taste preference is. Okay, for me, where I'm at right now, dry age without any type of smoke or wood is more preferable because I really want to taste the dry age. When you start getting into the wood fire cooking and you're burning logs that aren't burnt out, I like to cook basically my wood down to charcoal, to ash, so that it's cleaner. Okay, so then you really taste the meat. When you start, burning unburnt fuel, the logs themselves, it has these creosotes and different flavor compounds that will get on the meat, and it kind of just coats your palate. So for dry, I like that for more wet age beef, okay? But for the dry age, I really like cleaner. I like the steakhouse broiler. I like using a plancha, and that's just a heated piece of steel. It's you can do that in your home with a cast iron skillet.
It's called a plancha?
Plancha, it's just kind of this flat sheet of steel. Mm-hmm. And it's all about crust development and surface contact. So I like to cut the steaks on a saw. So it's a perfect line and it's all about contact, direct with the surface. It's about the browning of the meat. If you're going to get in there and you're going to cook over live wood like that, he's doing it obviously right because he's amazing. But, when you raise and lower the shelf, like I was saying, how I rest it, you can start on the higher level of the heat and then you bring it up higher. The actual grill higher, and it's actually resting while still getting the tickle of heat up there.
the tickle of heat.
Yeah, so I imagine it like, so the flames won't actually touch the meat. It kind of tickles it. So it's kind of like, it kind of wisps at the bottom of the meat.
And so the way he's doing it at Bazaar Meats, he's using wet aged steaks because that's how you would cook over that kind of.
I don't know if he's doing it. That's my personal preference. I mean, I think he does do some aging. He does do some aging, I believe, over there. So, I mean,
but it's just, I've watched YouTube videos on how to cook the perfect steak. You can watch 3 different videos from 3 different chefs, and there's 3 different methods. And like, well,
same thing about dry aging, though. I mean, all dry aging is not created equal. I call it an environmental chamber. So think about it like making cheese in France. You say, hey, I order goat cheese, and you think you'd get one type of goat cheese across the line. I'm creating an environment just like a cheesemaker, okay, that's unique to my own. I actually have the culture from like 15, 16 years ago that I've traveled with.
Hold on. You put culture? So
Yeah, I've like a method. I basically take meat that has been aged and I bring those spores, if you will, from that aging meat because, you know, there's a mold on it. It's a friendly mold. And
it's a friendly mold.
Yeah, I like it. I don't want to like, you know, turn people off to it because this has been.
I didn't know that you brought your own mold.
Yeah, so
I just figured you just let it dry age.
It's not as simple as that. For me, like it's each environment. Again, so I get away from like someone can turn around and say like my dry age is incredibly clean at 100 days, 120 days. Because I get there slowly, my temperature is very low. I like to, you know, dry age at 32 to 35 degrees. I like a higher humidity so I don't dehydrate the meat too soon. I like 85%, sometimes a little bit lower if I want to pull. It really depends, you know.
So
and
when you
lots of fans.
So when you say like how are you bringing this culture in, and how do you get it to interact with the meat?
I basically take pieces from the previous, you know, dry age room and I bring it to that, and so I put it up by the fan and it will circulate spores.
You put it by the fan, like how do you do that?
Well, there's a fan in a cooler, and it's blowing around. It's like blowing so it'll blow the spores around the room. So my dry age has a unique flavor. You might try, you know, some great guys who are like master purveyors in the Bronx, which is these guys are like my heroes. You know, they taught me practically dry aging. They have their own flavor, so their dry age tastes different. You know, Pat LaFrieda is another New York guy, does amazing dry age beef as well. You know, his has a different flavor. So, you know, for me, that's why I take a lot of pride, even though it's not the most cost-effective thing to carry, you know, $100,000 in inventory, but it gives me a unique flavor profile that is my unique selling point for my restaurant.
So you have these pieces. So like those steaks that we saw in that photograph, you would take one of those dry aged steaks when it's ready, and then you would trim the pieces off. Then you use those pieces, those darkened pieces, which just has the spores on it, and that would. How do you know how much to put in there?
I put as much as I can. You know, I don't want it too like clean in there. I want it to be an environment, so it's like a cave. You know, I'll put a couple of trays in, and then I'm very tactile, so I'll touch the meat and I'll feel it, and, you know, I'll taste it. I'll see where we're at. I'm always cutting into a steak. It's like a lot like.
When you say you taste it, like you cook it?
Yeah, like I'll cut off a piece. Like how are we looking at 30 days? How are we looking at 50 days? So each room is different because, you know, I had a dry age room in Vegas, and we had, you know, ceilings that were 30, 35 feet. You know, a lot of circulating air. It was just like had a different flavor profile. We were able to age 150 days, and that was like our sweet spot. Okay, and then here in Hollywood, it's a lot less. I have a lower ceiling. It circulates differently. It's just, you have to really kind of taste. It's not just like, hey, I have dry age. Or you go to the supermarket, it's like, oh, you sell dry age? Okay, great, I'll take it. And if you think that's what it tastes like, it's a good indicator of what it is. But if you really want to get, you know, like down to it, you know, each dry age can taste a lot different.
That's really weird. So it's very experimental in a lot of ways.
It's constantly moving.
How long did it take you to dial it in?
Well, when I first did it, it was really by mistake, particularly the extended age, because we just weren't selling the meat. So I had a lot of pieces like left, you know, back for a long time. And, you know, I was like, I cut into it and I tasted it. It's like, whoa. I mean, this is incredible. And I was talking to the old school guys who dry age, like, oh, you're wasting your money. nobody wants steak over 42 days. You know, it's just dehydrating, whatever. I was like, no, I think I'm onto something. You know, there's a big difference here in the flavor. And as, you know, we would see like a huge difference, a jump in flavor and like good quality, not like the funky stuff, like the full year. That's another level.
It's very good though. You say funky, and I just want to clarify to people, it is delicious.
Yeah, it is delicious,
but it's unusual. It's like you're eating something from Africa, like some unusual kudu meat or something like that, some strange game.
Yeah.
It's got.
And you don't want to eat too much. Like people want like a whole steak. I'm like, no, you just want 2 slices of it. Savor it like a fine wine. Understand it, get to know it, but don't like hunker down on it.
How come you don't want people to hunker down on it?
Because sometimes too much of a good thing is not good, okay? And I say the same thing also for the Japanese Wagyu. Like, oh, you see all that fat and the marbleization. It's incredibly rich, and if you eat it like a Westerner, it's not right. It's too much. So certain steaks, certain types of beef, you should be eating only a small amount and appreciating it. Anything more, like it's just, I don't know, it gets me, it's too much for me.
When did people start dry aging a year? Like when did this really, because this is not something, I mean, obviously I know nothing about restaurants other than that they're great. But when I had heard about dry aging, I would hear like 30 days dry age, 60 days dry age. I never heard of a year. Like, is this a new thing?
You know, they were doing it in Spain for some time, particularly with the older animals like the oxen, you know, animals that are 5 years, 8 years, 10 years old. And they would age these for long periods of time. I was not aware of this when I started doing it, but they were the first people that I heard about it was doing it while I was doing it. And there was amazing food writer Jeffrey Steingarten who just like dialed into me. And we did a tasting with one of my culinary heroes, Harold McGee, who wrote the incredible book on food and cooking, which is a scientific manual to all chefs around. He's an amazing guy. And he had put in his book that there's really no difference in flavor when you get to that point. And so that later stage. So we cooked 3 steaks and we cut a cube out of the center of it. And at that point, you know, he says, wait, maybe there is something different. I'm not sure. I mean, nowadays you hear more about it because we're chefs. We like to play with things. We like to push the limits on things. But not many people want to make the commitment because it's so costly to carry the inventory. And they're scared to actually do it because if you screw it up, you know, you lose all the money. So I see more of it now. But back when I was doing it, there really wasn't anybody else pushing the limits. Maybe a few people. I don't want to say like I was the only one, but, you know, possibly there could have been a few people, but, you know.